All right, so welcome everyone to the panel presentation hosted today by Women's Empowerment International. My name is Sarah Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the organization. And here on co-hosting today is Theresa. She's over there. Theresa, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Theresa Wong. I'm the Assistant Director for Women's Empowerment as of fall last year.
Yeah, thank you. And so Theresa is going to help with a lot of our technology here. She'll be monitoring the Q&A window as well as the chat window, looking to see if anyone's hand is up and all of that as we go along today. And I will be helping to moderate our panel. On our panel today, I will do more introductions shortly, but we have Elisa Sabatini from VIA International, Jen Yor from the UCSD Center on Gender Equity and Health, and Tanvi Jaluka from the Innovations for Poverty Action. So thank you all for being here today. I so appreciate the time that you have taken to be here and share your expertise and insights with us. Today's panel is focused on advancing women's economic empowerment and gender equality and equity around the world. March, as you all probably know, is Women's History Month and holds International Women's Day. So it's a pleasure to convene this community gathering today. And we celebrate you, everybody who is here, our community, for being the kind of person to intentionally be here today and reflect on such important topics that we've laid out for our presentation today. For anyone who is new to Women's Empowerment International, or WE as we call it, our mission is to empower women with tools to work their way out of poverty, care for their families, and strengthen their communities. We envision a world without poverty in which women are empowered, uplifted, and equal partners in society. We envision a world in which women live in safe environments, free from gender-based violence, and have access to all the needed resources. They live in a place where they have hope, opportunity, and ability to control their lives and create the futures that they envision for their families. So to that end, our organization funds programs around the world that provide women with microloans, training and education, and practical, holistic support that's centered around women's economic empowerment. We currently support 8 partners in 5 countries, including the US, here in San Diego and Puerto Rico, Mexico, Haiti, Honduras, and Uganda. These programs enable women to build their skills, obtain stable living wage jobs, obtain small business loans, and launch sustainable income generating enterprises that serve their families, villages, and communities. So that is about us and our organization. And now I'd like to jump into introducing our first panelist, who will then share a little brief presentation about her work. And then we will go around to the rest of our panelists and then start with our questions. So our first panelist up today is Jen Yor. Jen is the Senior Research Program Manager at UCSD's Center on Gender Equity and Health, or GEH, and holds a master's in public health. She administers a diverse research portfolio on behalf of Dr. Anita Raj at GEH and is responsible for managing multiple domestic and international research studies and study staff. She has experience managing projects in the fields of reproductive, maternal, neonatal, and child health, gender equity, gender-based violence, HIV, and tobacco prevention and control across the US, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. She has experience and expertise in project management and project budget management for grants funded by NIH, UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and David and Lucille Packard Foundation, just to name a few. So Jen, thank you so much for being here today, and I will turn it over to you.
Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So I'm popping this up on the screen. If you guys can just reassure me that you're able to see it, that would be great. Okay, fantastic. And next question, are you able to see my notes or is it just the presentation?
It looks like we might be seeing your notes.
Okay, let me switch screens really quickly. Oh, it just moved on its own. Okay, let me stop share. If I can't get it to work, then I'll just speak without it. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Jennifer Yor, as Sarah shared, and it's lovely to speak with you all today. I am with the Center on Gender Equity and Health at UC San Diego, and we were established in 2013 with the support of the University of California Office of the President. And we have since grown from being two primary investigators, two professors who were leading the center, Dr. Anita Raj and Dr. Jay Silverman, to including over 27 faculty, 29 staff located globally, and currently 5 pre and postdoc fellows that are working closely with our staff. And we essentially think of ourselves as functioning as sort of multiple labs within a broad umbrella dedicated to implementing multidisciplinary research efforts to understand and eliminate gender inequity, gender-based violence, and to provide academic and practitioner training for our next generation scholars in the hopes of achieving eventually gender equity and empowerment for women and girls globally. Recognizing that you all have a long-standing investment in women's economic empowerment, my thinking was that it would make sense potentially to speak with you all about a couple different pathways that we currently have related to women's economic empowerment, 2 of which are, well, one is a specific project dedicated to that. One is tied to that via women's experiences of violence during COVID. And then more broadly, just our sort of general commitment and notional engagement in efforts around women's collectives. So really quickly, we work with functioning via 3 pathways: academic, programmatic, and government. Academic being that we are working to build a research agenda and support next generation scholars, as well as our colleagues in low and middle income countries to lift up their work and build the reputations and help capacity build our partners globally. And we're doing that through our programmatic engagement via our research and evaluation studies, where we collaborate with those partners, publish with them, and work to disseminate findings in whatever way is most helpful to them. We also are engaged with the government in some capacity, primarily to provide evidence-based information to inform policymaking and legislative efforts. A great example of that is some work we did with our CalVEX study around gender-based violence in the state of California that has led to a bill being introduced to focus on supporting violence prevention efforts in the state, which we're very proud of. It's one of the few times you get to see like something that it's a big impact that you typically anticipate taking quite some time, and that one moved very quickly. So the Emerge study. The Emerge study is what we developed to try to address power and access for women and girls. The goal being that we should, work to expand freedom, rights, autonomy by building an evidence base to support that, and by improving gender measurement and putting those findings into the hands of programmatic and policymakers, as I mentioned earlier. So big picture, this was funded about roughly 6 years ago by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As it started, it was intended to pilot test measures related to women's economic empowerment in India through small-scale grants that we awarded there. It was successful, and in the process, we conducted a review of gender measurement broadly in the field and started to compile that and validate measures that were being used. So survey items that were being used in questions and research globally to assess women's economic empowerment. And in validating those and reviewing them, we were able to create a repository of sorts that would function as a public good for the broader research community and programmatic community working in this realm. And we consolidated it all, created a website, emerge.ucsc.edu, and have continued to maintain that site. Its growth led to continued funding and commitments from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to sort of build that work out even further, so that we were able to really focus in on women's economic empowerment and agency and gender norms specifically, to commit to identifying those measures as they're developing, because this is relatively new in the field. This push for gender measurement really came about just in the last 20 years. And so we're trying to capitalize on that groundswell around the issue. And then the next step that was identified was, let's get this beyond, like out of the on the ground research that's taking place, and put it into the hands of those large scale surveyors like the DHS, Afrobarometer, work being done by USAID and the World Bank, so that they are incorporating these gender measures into their surveys as well, to improve data collection and understanding of women's lives in terms of advancing women's economic empowerment. So that's been quite exciting. And we're hoping to really be able to move that into the next phase in the next couple of years. Moving from that, but along the same vein, we've also been engaged in women's collectives work through our engagement with the Gates Foundation and others. Throughout history, women have come together in groups, and more modern examples of that and what are being currently supported in a lot of ways include savings groups, self-help groups, mothers groups, community mobilization groups, and groups for adolescent girls. And recognizing that you all are supporting a lot of microfinance efforts, it's clear to us that these opportunities offer women resilience. The sum is greater than its parts, and it provides them with opportunities to leverage the support and access that they are afforded through these collectives. The support that they can receive from each other includes financial and social. They gain access to markets and financial services, opportunity such as skills development and expanding their networks, as well as at some points influence related to reproductive health and decision-making, collective action efforts, or political participation eventually, as well as safety from backlash and sanctions when that does take place. And we think that this is rooted in the solidarity that comes from face-to-face connection and joint problem solving. So that work is very exciting, and we continue to be engaged in some capacity around collectives, though our current research portfolio is not currently engaged in that work. In terms of COVID's effect on women and progress towards gender equality and their empowerment, it's clear to us from this CalVEX study, it was a state representative survey that we conducted starting in 2020 of 2,000 California residents, and that we've done annually since. And luck would have it that the survey's first day was actually the first day of the shutdown and stay-at-home orders going into effect in the state of California. And what we have seen consistently through that work is that women are more likely to experience anxiety and depression, IPV or interpersonal violence, as well as sexual violence, which I'm sure is not surprising to anyone, but is still sad to see reiterated and reinforced by our findings. Silver lining is that did lead to that information being put into the hands of legislators and the advancement of a bill dedicated to trying to address street harassment, and also a commitment of a significant amount of funding from the governor to put towards domestic violence efforts. And sort of where this ties in with women's economic empowerment is obviously that women who are experiencing interpersonal violence, sexual violence, domestic violence, have limitations placed upon them and their agency and autonomy that can prevent them from gaining that economic opportunity that could exist for them. A lot of times women in those situations may also be restricted in terms of their access to finance or financial support, and have an inability to get out of those situations because of limitations like that. So in our minds, empowerment is both a process and an outcome. And if we're looking to affect transformative change, disrupt these cycles of poverty that, as I know we is trying to do, We think about the fact that power means control over resources, over ideologies, and that means empowerment is the activity of gaining control over these things. And in our minds, we see one possible pathway for that as being, generating evidence-based data, putting it into the hands of those that can utilize it to affect policy change and pass legislation to advance women and to provide support via collectives. And we're hopeful that our work is achieving that. And I know I just went 30 seconds over my 10 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up. And thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It looks like we do have one question, and we will hold that until the very end. So we will go around to each person, and then we'll jump into questions from our attendees. All right, so next up we have Tanvi DeLuca from, she's the program manager for the Financial Inclusion Program at Innovations for Poverty Action. This is a research and policy nonprofit that creates and shares evidence while equipping decision makers to use evidence to reduce poverty. And so I'm sure she's going to talk a lot more about that. Prior to joining IPA, Tanvi designed randomized control trials and worked on topics related to mobile money at the UCSD Program Design and Evaluation Lab. At the Center for Global Development, she served as the Gender Program Coordinator, overseeing a portfolio of interventions for women's financial inclusion and entrepreneurship. In addition, she has conducted research measuring the impact of economic development programming on gender-based violence and household bargaining. She received her Master of Public Policy from UCSD's School of Global Policy and Strategy and her BA in International Studies and Economics from Vassar College. So welcome, Tanvi. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. And Jen, I loved hearing more about the background of Emerge. It's definitely, a compendium of sources that I've used in my work before. So thanks for sharing that. But yeah, as I was thinking about what to talk about today, I got the sense from Sarah that, it would be interesting to talk a little bit about how IPA thinks about funding and creating programming around women's empowerment issues. So I know you all do a lot of work around microfinance and microcredit. And so I thought I would share a little bit of evidence on some of the work that we've done around microfinance. So I will just share my screen. I also have a few slides. Hopefully you can see this okay. But as Sarah mentioned, I work for IPA and we're a research and policy nonprofit. So what that means is that we both generate rigorous evidence using methodologies like randomized control trials, survey work. We do a little bit of mystery shopping, and we also have researchers working within various governments. So we have partnerships with the Nigerian Ministry of Finance, with the Competition Authority of Kenya, and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we work with them to analyze their the data that they have on the populations that they're trying to target and come up with effective solutions to improve their access to financial products and services. And so maybe it'll be good to talk a little bit about what we think of as financial health, and I might use financial health interchangeably with economic empowerment, but you can think of those two things as similar, although financial health refers more to access to formal financial products. But we think of financial health as the ability to access money quickly and affordably, and especially in terms of an emergency. And so, for example, the survey question that we'll often ask people is, in a week's worth of time, if there's an emergency, how easy would it be for you to get X sum of money? And that typically will give us some kind of insight into how easy it is for people to have access to something that can support them in terms of an emergency. So it shows their access to formal financial products like savings accounts. It shows whether they're able to plan for the future and prepare for emergencies and things like that. And so what we're really getting at here is this question of both access and behavior. And so we need both of these components in order to have kind of like the baseline requirements for financial health. This isn't, all the elements of financial health, but we like to think of these two components as kind of like the necessary minimum must-haves. And so when we think of programming, we not only want to make sure that the program is trying to improve access, but also actually has a real measurable effect on access. So not only is it enough for you to provide access to a financial savings account, but do people actually use them? Are people actually depositing money into their accounts? So that's where the behavioral component comes into as well. So here's another way to think about it. So access can be things like savings products, insurance products, mobile money, and credit products, which includes microfinance or microlending products. And you can think of the types of behaviors that you'd want associated with these products to be things like risk preparedness. So do you have healthy savings behaviors? Do you save frequently and have a good nest to fall back on in the case of an emergency? Do you have an insurance product that lets you do that as well? Mobile money is an effective way for you to not only get money from your network in case of an emergency, but also to send money out. So we're talking about remittances here, and we're also talking about money that flows within a border. On the credit side, that's when we're thinking more about building wealth. And so we think of more of using credit for some kind of productive activity. So whether that is having your own business or putting that into your family agricultural plot, we're thinking about using credit as a way to maximize business outcomes. And so this is a theory of change from microcredit, which I think all of you are kind of familiar with. But ideally, what we'd want to see from a microcredit program is that when this microcredit program is delivered, we'd want to see that manifest into healthy business behaviors. And so that would mean smartly investing the funds that you get into profitable business inputs. And we'd want to see improvements in business activities. So do you have a ledger? Are you able to kind of respond to the market? Are you able to be flexible? Are you able to pay back your loans on time? And then the idea is that once you have kind of that startup capital, you'll eventually be able to continue to grow on that business. And then that should translate into real welfare impacts. So not only should you be seeing impacts on your business, you should be seeing impacts on your household. And also on your personal, social, and psychological well-being. So a few years ago, IPA economists, along with our sister organization, JPAL, conducted a meta-analysis of 6 different big microcredit studies. And we've basically found that microcredit has been really good at increasing business profits, which makes sense because you have some money going in, and then that kind of feeds into the revenue you have. It does, in some contexts, provide women with more autonomy over the way they run their businesses, and it does increase their business assets and inventory. So we see that women are using those funds to actually buy products that will buy durable products that will then benefit their business. What we see less of is sustained impacts on things like household income, business profits, household spending, and social well-being. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there where we see you have an impact on this intermediate outcome, but you don't necessarily see those final outcomes. And so what this suggests is that on average, microcredit has not been too transformational. And I'm talking about the traditional microcredit model where just the credit is given. And so this by no means means that we shouldn't be investing in microcredit, but it means that we should be thinking about the behavioral component of microcredit too. So we've got the access with providing the product. Now, how do we incentivize healthy behavior change? One solution could be to target those people who already kind of have those financial and business behaviors. So we had a study in India where we targeted gung-ho entrepreneurs, so people who were very much growth-minded, who wanted to grow a business not only to sustain their livelihoods, but also to actually have kind of an ambitious effort, actually to have an ambition to have some kind of business growth. So we saw that those entrepreneurs performed a lot better. They were able to repay their loans on time, and they were able to actually have those transformational effects in terms of business outcomes. Another option could be flexible repayment plans. So thinking about how we can make it easier for people to pay back their loans. If they're credit strapped, especially, giving someone access to a loan might place them in a more indebted situation, which we'd want to avoid. Asset-based microfinance is another way to kind of make sure that people aren't falling into debt traps. And so it's a microfinance model where you're encouraged to use your microfinance to purchase a specific asset. And then if in the case of default, that asset can then be used as collateral. So it doesn't require collateral as a way to get the loan in the first place. And it also doesn't impose really strict repayment requirements on the person. And then finally, we'd want to make sure that this programming is paired with some kind of intervention that improves women's intra-household bargaining power. So this is getting at kind of the question of how can we address social norms while we're doing this type of programming. So yes, you can give women access to money, but then if they're not given control of that money, does it really have a transformational impact on her livelihood? And so this is the kind of thought process that we go through when we're trying to decide what types of programs we want to fund or develop. And so it's really thinking about, okay, if it's a financial literacy program, what is the product that we can pair with it? If it's a product, what type of literacy program can we pair with it? Or what kind of norm changing program can we pair with it? If you're interested, I have links for you. So I can have Sarah send it out after this meeting, but thank you so much. And also happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That is really interesting. And I wanted to start digging into what both you and Jen have talked about, asking questions, but we'll hold on that. And I know there is a question about whether or not everyone can have the slides afterwards. So Tommy, I'll send out yours, and then Jen, if it's okay, I'll share yours as well. Okay, so more on all of this good stuff, and on to Elisa for her introduction. So Elisa Sabatini is president of VIA International, one of WE's actually funded partners, and that's since 2014. So Elisa became president of VIA International in 1998, when it was still called Los Niños. In 2005, she oversaw both the transformation, the formation of Los Niños de Baja California, an independent Mexican nonprofit, and the transition of the US organization to VIA International. She continues to serve as president of both entities. Elisa brings years of experience working throughout Latin America with an expertise in microfinance and community development. She continues to oversee the expansion of a global education program, now partnering with over 60 universities and high schools across the country, with the goal of making VIA International a self-sustaining community development organization. She has also recently worked to develop corporate social responsibility programming and employee engagement, providing relevant volunteer opportunities for local businesses. So Elisa, I turn it over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Sounds like a lot. I was sitting here and a bit overwhelmed with the presentations of Jen and Tanvi. I mean, the work that is being done, and to really point us in the right, or maybe in some new directions for the empowerment of women. I thought the theme was such a large one, women's economic empowerment and gender equity around the world. I mean, that's a big challenge to take on. And then a very, I'm so moved by seeing that there's actually so much attention placed on it in academic and research settings, because my life experience has been that it's often been on the periphery of what's being done at that more macro scale of economic development. But I wanted to mention a couple of things about VIA in particular. It is a 46-year-old organization. And I think for about 35 years, we've been working pretty directed toward women's initiatives, initially in programs more oriented around health and nutrition, and then also around organic production. There were these sort of nascent elements of our programming. But now for nearly 20 years, we have been working on women's educational programs. We have a program that is a certified diplomado in Mexico, which provides certification for women that participate in that. They're generally low income women that have not had much opportunity for education at all. In that same thrust, we launched a microcredit program, kind of microfinance for small business. We have had given out about $2.2 million over the last maybe 15 years. And of that, in the last 10, we've had 100% repayment. And some of the things that are mentioned in the research are our belief of the why of that, which has to do a lot with solidarity and collectives of women. I do think it's very appropriate that we uses we, because the we meaning the us of this work is really a precious thing. The programs we've worked on with we in particular are a program called Estima. And actually we've done work with UCSD on that and San Diego State, which is among the most vulnerable women. These women are sex workers, and what a small belief in them and a small bit of money can do to change their entire trajectory is astonishing. We also work through our Via Migrante program with primarily deported mothers and another very vulnerable group in Mexico. And most recently, we've been working with indigenous peoples, the Mixteco people that many have migrated to the border region and have very unique social mores too around women and their role in the family and in society. So more about those. I do want to speak a little bit, since we've had a lot of macro conversation here, which is very important. But to go from that we to maybe the one, the individual. And, women have a way of finding their way. And a lot of times that trajectory is not at all linear. If we're privileged and we have the opportunity to go through schooling and we have the opportunity to educate ourselves and, maybe even wait to have a family, or, that is one way of women in the world. But most women's lives are not like that. They're more of a spiral of going forward and going backward and having issues and crises and health and children and migrating. And so it's messy and very complex. And the structures that we are in do not support the priorities of women. So my assertion here, my hope is that we're actually changing these systems. And I think some of this research that's being done can maybe point us in that direction. But going from the we to the one, I want to talk about a woman. I'm going to put her up here on the screen. This woman is named Elsa No, N-O-H, No Vasquez. She's a Mexican woman. She came from the Yucatan. She's Mayan. And she came across the country with her family some 25 years ago to live in Tijuana. She spoke no Spanish. She spoke only her Mayan language. But somehow in the community, she heard about a nutrition program and she tried to participate, but her husband didn't want her leaving the house. So she would get him all ready for work. She would do all her household chores. She would sneak out to the nutrition class, and then she would be back in time for when he got home so she could, have his meals prepared and do what she was intended to do as a wife. And at some juncture, our program director went and spoke to her husband and explained what we were doing, that it wasn't dangerous for her to be in a group of women learning about nutrition and health education. And so some years into her participation with us, she became what we call a promotora. And a promotora is a community change agent, actually. Women that work in the community support other women and to the benefit of them learning about nutrition and health education. When we offered a program for furthering her education, she only had primary school, but she jumped right in. She participated in the 2-year program to get a certificate and a diplomado and complete her middle school education. She also started a small business, a small house, a little household shop out of her house, and ran that business until until recent times. She was also raising children, 4 of them. And those 4 children that are now adults have all been to university. Her one son is a chef because he remembers fondly all his mother's cooking and everything from her nutrition and education program. Elsa has supported us also in our global education program to host student groups that come to the region and tell them about her experience and tell them about what it's like to come from a Mayan traditional community and move to a very large city. And she's truly been a leader in our community programs for probably the last 25 years. I want to show one other photo of her, if I can here. Here let's see if, oh, it's showing the same photo for some reason. Let me see if this other one will pop up. No, I don't know why. It's showing the same photo. Well, it's behind here. There we go. So this is one of the coordinators of a student program that comes down and visits Mexico annually. It happens to be a high school from the East Coast. This is their teacher that comes with them. And he was out there in the community. And if you've been to the mountains near here, Tecate, Mexico in the winter, it's pretty cold. And he was commenting about how they thought they were coming to California to be warm, and he actually was cold. So she sat there and talked to him in their sort of broken back and forth Spanish and whatever, trying to understand each other. And in, 45-minute and an hour time, she knit him this hat because she had heard that he was cold. So, I mean, this is what women do. They sort of do it all. They raise children, they support the family economy, they take care of other people. They're flexible. They're often not offered a lot of control in their lives or in their reality. And I really wanted to honor Elsa with these comments. Elsa died of COVID in December. And a lot of this has happened in our communities in this last couple of years due to lack of access of health and other benefits. But these women, in this messy, complex way, they are our leaders, and they are going to show us, I think, a way forward. And if they're augmented by this wonderful research that's being done, I think we have a way of changing these systems and changing the outcomes for our daughters and granddaughters. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you for sharing that story, Elisa. That was really touching. And there are several comments in the chat box too that thank you and appreciate the legacy of Elsa that you shared. Kind of along the lines of what you all have been talking about, and especially ending on that note about recovery of COVID, and Jen, you also touched on the impacts of the pandemic. What do you think are, and I could pose this to anyone or all of you, what is kind of the next step for coming out of this pandemic and kind of recovering and addressing the extra need for not only women's economic empowerment, but just all of like the psychosocial things that Tanvi, you were talking about too. It's a big question, I know.
Well, I mean, That is a big question. I don't, speaking from experience, I had twins during the pandemic. We were hoping for one sibling for our 6-year-old, and she got 2, which was very exciting, but also really overwhelming. And I think, over and over again, you're hearing women call out and express how hard this is, how much work it is, how challenging it is, and yet they keep going, and they're getting acknowledgement. People are saying, you're doing your best. How are you doing it all? And women are like, thank you for acknowledging it, but we're still drowning here. Like, I don't want to be a superhero. I want to be like a regular person. And it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, the prisoners got, updated early on when we were warming this session up, when I said, my twins have group and they are here, and I put them down for a nap and hopefully they stay asleep, but no guarantees. So anyway, I think that, in terms of like coming out of this and figuring out what's next in terms of lifting up and supporting women, on our end, from the academic perspective, we put a lot of emphasis and priority on, the research and building an evidence base and getting that information into the hands of people that can affect change. Our work, I think, for what feels like forever, has remained quite siloed, and in an ivory tower. It gets published into these journals, and then where does it go? So I think that on our end, we're looking to find those partners, those supporters, those funders that want to prioritize advancing it into the next phase, from data to impact. And that entails putting it in the hands of, those that can share it that way, whether that's media, legislators, policymakers, advocates who can take it forward to help inform their efforts to secure, funding and recognition, so that work like Elisa's can continue to move forward and support those communities, and so that our work can continue to advance the field. Long-winded with references to multiple babies, but it's my first thought.
Well, as Elisa said, it's messy, and this work is so complex, and there isn't necessarily just one answer to this question, and it's not necessarily an easy answer either. So all of that is relevant and good. Thank you.
Well, I would just make a shorter, maybe just summary comment to just say, I think we need to change the systems we're in. I think we need to get the people that are our politicians out and get some people, women, in positions of power. So, I mean, there's a whole thing to do politically that is really, to me, almost like a revolution. And it needs to happen. It needs to happen now. I also think that we need to accept and embrace multiple ways of working. I think some of my friends that have children and been able to do some of this hybrid stuff where they can work at home part of the time at least. And, I mean, I think it needs to be embraced and supported financially and in the workplace. And I think that also what's happened with, with the COVID situation is that people have become much more aware of the fact that they want a life, not just a treadmill of stress, and they want a life, and women are going to show that way, because I think that the sort of linear perspective of top-down management and just all the structures that we live in, generated from a manufacturing kind of idea of society, they need to change. And by the way, we're not going to have a planet if they don't.
Well, and some of the microfinance programs and programs that we support in terms of viewing women as entrepreneurs and supporting small business startups, it's also providing alternatives from a traditional working environment as well, and one that works for them and their family and their situation too.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was actually just reading Debbie's question in the chat, which I thought was really interesting about how the shutdown impacted research on women's empowerment. And, you know, for our work, so much of it is field research. And with the mobility restrictions, we couldn't do any of it. And so we had to switch to a lot of survey models with phone surveys, which is really, really challenging and introduces a ton of bias when you're thinking about gender, especially. You know, most families will have one mobile phone that they'll share, and the husband will be the primary owner of it. And so automatically it kind of like distorts the kind of data you're getting. And so without having those boots on the ground, it's been really, really difficult. And I think what both Jen and Elisa were alluding to has been really, you know, impactful in our work too, because, you know, once you don't have those nonprofits on the ground, kind of like filling in the gaps that the government should be providing, you really realize how bad the system's been. You realize how terrible like a lack of safety net is when it comes to these women's lives, even in kind of like the delivery of, you know, social assistance funds that, you know, we all got our like $700 or whatever. People in the developing world did too. They all got their funds sent via like a Venmo app on their phone. Again, women don't have cell phones, or they're not the only owner of their cell phone. And so they don't get that money anyways. And so it just really was like a wake-up call for us, I think, that, you know, we're doing all this great research, but like, what can we do to make sure that research is really embedded within the institutions that we're working with? Because when you have like this type of global crisis, it's really up to, you know, the government that has the reach to the people, and they need to be stepping up. So yeah, lots of different thoughts, but
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And Debbie's question you referenced, which I really appreciate, was how much have border shutdowns and restrictions impacted both the research on gender empowerment as well as the service organizations trying to provide help? How have they all been impacted because of COVID? So I don't know if Elisa or Jen, you have anything else you wanted to add to expand on that?
Well, I would say that for us here, you know, living in the border region, and that the majority of the women, we have some things happening in San Diego as well, but the majority of the women in our programs are in Mexico. And certainly this idea of shutting down the border, because I mean, I went back and forth because I didn't have any restriction, but to, you know, every person with a visa coming from Mexico. I mean, what happened financially for people who rely heavily on informal work up here, they come up across, they clean our homes, they do our yard work, they, you know, was just totally earth-shaking for the people down there. And then as far as the microfinance, I think what we experienced with our communities was that those initiatives are generally community oriented. Or now some of them could do some sort of online something, and they did some food sales where they would do delivery, or some of them adapted to the situation to a certain degree. But most of the small businesses just shut down. And if those were providing, you know, 60–70% of the income to the family, we actually ended up doing food assistance, which we haven't done for years. The other thing I would mention with the closing of the businesses is we tried to find ways to hire some of our micro enterprise entrepreneurs, and we ended up hiring them to bring and provide meals at the shelters, so that would be a way of, you know, supporting their business to keep going during the kind of crisis. But the crisis isn't over. I mean, actually, the schools in Tijuana just opened February 28th. So the impact down there was in some ways much greater. And of course, most of those children and families don't have Zoom, and they don't have internet. So those kids have just been out of school for 2 years.
Yeah, some big impacts for sure. Well, we appreciate all that your organization is doing to try to address all of that, though. And I think that's one of the really powerful things about the way that the microfinance is done in your organization kind of addresses the things that Tanvi was saying can be barriers to the success of those programs, and your organization has found a way to address that and make sure that they are really successful. So we're proud to be supporters.
Well, and we are very grateful to WE for their flexibility. Your all's flexibility during the crisis to sort of say, we understand you're not going to be, you're not going to be wonderfully successful right now with providing the loans. So I know that for the women of Estima, the sex workers, their comment was that that program kept them alive during the COVID.
Thank you. A couple more questions have come in the chat. Judith, Jen is working on answering your question right now. It looks like Judith had asked Jen, are your empowerment measures available in a published article or available on your website? I think Jen answered that. Jen?
Yeah, I was just going to share that we do have a search function on this site where you can put in a particular term and it will populate it, but it does also allow you to filter everything by dimensions. So if there are particular areas of interest within empowerment, whether that's like education, migration, children's exposure to violence, et cetera, we've got a laundry list there to winnow it down. But certainly anyone here is welcome to reach out to me after today, and I'm more than happy to provide links or guidance related to that work.
Great, thank you. And Judith, your other question was just answered by Tanvi in the Q&A window as well, so everyone can see that answer in there. Following this session, and we're getting close on our time here. So following this session, I will send out slides as well as links to everyone's organization, links to the Emerge site through Jen's organization, and any other relevant things that have been requested in the chat window or the Q&A window, or that any of our panelists send to share. Before I wrap it up, I just want to give each of our panelists one more minute here to share any parting thoughts that they would like to leave with us, things to reflect on for these topics. Elisa, let's start with you.
Well, the one thing I would like to comment on is that I sound a little bit harsh maybe about what needs to happen, because I think there is so much more that needs to happen. But on the other hand, because I've been working in this field for, quite a long time, for 30 plus years, and the changes are happening. I mean, I used to go to meetings, I'd be the only woman in the room, and, be the only director of something, now I go to a meeting and it's 50% women, and they're in positions of directorships, and you see them also, you see them in the banks, you see them, they're lawyers, so I think I just want to at least leave on that positive note that a lot is happening, and hopefully we can make it sort of a bigger wave.
Thank you. How about Tanvi?
Sure. I suppose my parting thought is that, I'm very new to this space in comparison to a lot of you folks who've been working on this for years and years. But, even in the time that I've been working in the space, I've seen a lot of really interesting policies being made to support women's economic empowerment. I think there's a long way to go. I'm glad to be part of an effort of women who are committed to measuring and creating evidence around women's economic empowerment. And I think that evidence can go a long way. And yeah, just thank you all for your support in pushing this work forward.
Thank you. Jen.
Again, thank you so much. Oh, there's a tiny person that just zoomed past. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it. I threw our GEH website into the chat as well, because Emerge is specific to a particular project, and that site will give you sort of like the broader view of all of the additional work involved in CalVex, which I mentioned earlier is referenced there as well. And there's announcements for our Agency for All work, which we're very excited about. That's the one that I referenced, where we're making sure the bulk of it goes to the hands of our LMIC counterparts. Elisa, your work is really inspiring. Tanvi, the microcredit piece that you spoke on and the point about financial literacy was just super insightful, and I appreciate that being emphasized, especially the literacy point and the need to counter that with other additional access. So thank you again. And we're seeing advancement. I know on our end, it's slow moving, but we are seeing it happen, and it's encouraging and exciting. And maybe that's the silver lining of this pandemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that puts us on a great note to wrap up on. So I just want to again thank all of you as panelists for being here. Thank you, Theresa, for your assistance in making this all work. And thank you to everyone who is here attending and took your lunch break to spend some time with us. These are all really important topics and really an important conversation. So please, I hope you go back and share some of these thoughts and some of your thoughts on all of this with friends, family, colleagues, and your networks to just keep these conversations going. If you have more ideas for we and what we can be doing as an organization, please share them with us. Reach out to us, to Theresa and I, or any one of the board members. Stay connected with us for those of you who are new to the organization and may be interested in how to get involved. I put some links in the chat window for our website, our newsletter to sign up for, and also a link to make a donation should you so choose. Keep your eyes on our website. We're making some changes over the next week. We'll have a new website, and you'll also see an event popping up for our Julian Giving Circle that's organizing a soup fundraiser at the Santa Isabel Nature Center in May. And again, just thank you all and have a great day. Bye.
I just have a quick question for Elisa.
Yes.
Can we share your email with the attendees if anybody has any questions? Because I noticed that Tanvi and Jen has shared their emails.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I will send that out all a little bit later today. So great point. Thank you.
Thanks again,
Bye.
everyone,
Thanks,
for
everyone.
joining.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye.